Good morning, everyone. How are you today? My name is Jody Huang, and I'm the Community Relations Officer of the Toronto Catholic District School Board. I just would like to welcome you for our Asian Book Reading Workshop. And there's so many things to talk about today. But before that, we would like first to ground ourselves with our prayer and land acknowledgement.
The land we walk on belongs to the Creator. Earth does not belong to humanity, but rather humanity is part of the earth. The land was created to be enjoyed by all living beings, a principle reflected in the Dish with One Spoon covenant. Taking only what we need to preserve our earth for future generations, leaving some for others as a sign of our respect and caring, and keeping it clean by revitalizing the land to sustain generations to come. All Toronto Catholic District School Board properties are situated on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples. We recognize that the land covered by Treaty 13 is held by the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We also listen to the echoes of their prayers to the Creator and respect the beauty of Mother Earth while striving to learn and draw wisdom from First Nations, Inuit, and Métis traditions.
And for our prayer, I want to talk and share about a prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, and this is about peace. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine mercy, grant that I may not so much seek to be considered as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. So good morning again, everyone, and thank you, Carmela, for that. And I'd like to introduce Carmela. Carmela La Rosa is our resource teacher and helping us here with our workshop this morning. And of course, the tech side, which is she's very good at. And today will be talking about the biggest continent on Earth. So I would like to greet everyone first. Happy Asian Canadian Heritage Month. And of course, you know that Asia is the biggest continent. It has 49 or 51 countries. You would be surprised, but sometimes geographically people are saying no, just 49. The others say no, 51. But it's very huge. And we're talking about a continent that occupies 60% of the earth. Like the population is really huge, and so many things to learn about Asia. And our theme this morning is all about contributions and service of Asian Canadians, and we call it Asian Canadian Legacy. We contribute, we serve. And this morning we are going to welcome someone who has written a lot of books about Asian contributions. And as you know, it is so important for us to learn about this part of our history and to recognize that there are really so many things that are not covered in our curriculum that we really need to be discussing about and know more about, and be proud of the contributions that all communities make in Canada that makes our country great. So here with us, giving us that contributions is Catherine Little. And let me just tell a little bit about Catherine. So Catherine will be talking about her book, Endgame, The Secret Force 136. That's very, very curious. Actually, when I saw that title, I was very curious myself. And this has a military slant. And it talks about and explores contributions of early Canadian-born Chinese to Canada's Second World War efforts and the sacrifices that the members made to show their loyalty to our country that disregarded them in this part of history. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Catherine Little.
Hello, everyone. Thank you to Jody and to Carmela for helping me to be able to do this presentation today. And thank you for coming to watch it virtually. And I'm calling this presentation My Learning Journey, so that you'll see that even as an adult, I continued to learn about the contributions of Asian Canadians to our society. So let us start. Whoops. So, as many of you may be, I'm an immigrant to Canada, which means that I was not born here, but I was born in another Asian country, India. So this first picture here shows me with my parents when we still lived in India. And if you look carefully at this birthday cake, it's my first birthday cake. My father had already had plans and dreams about immigrating to Canada. And he chose a birthday cake in the shape of an aeroplane for my first birthday. The second picture shows me, and that's my little brother. And that's us when we were living in India, when my father left to come to Canada. And we couldn't come with him at the very beginning because we just didn't have enough money and resources to all come to Canada at the same time. So my father came and lived here in Canada for about a year before my mother and my brother and I joined him. This is the picture that was on my immigration documents to come to Canada. People ask me why I was sad when I was coming to Canada, but I guess I was sad because I was leaving my friends, even though I was coming to a new country. So I arrived in Canada and I grew up in Canada and I went to school in Canada. I actually went to TCDSB school, Our Lady of Fatima in Toronto. And I graduated from university and I became a teacher. And eventually I married a man who wasn't Chinese. But all of that aside, I went on with my life and I taught school and I did all those kinds of things. But then in 2017, just before the pandemic, a few years before the pandemic, I learned something that I had not realized that had happened, which was that there were a group of men who were in Force 136. And I was watching my feed on my phone one day, and this article came up that said, Force 136, Chinese Canadian veteran reflects on service in a special unit force. And this really was shocking to me because I had never heard about Force 136 before. And I never really even realized that Chinese people had served in the military. Because during that time in Canada, we had some restrictions on what Chinese people in Canada could do because of immigration and because of head taxes and because of the Exclusion Act. So what did I learn in school about the Chinese involvement in World War II? And the answer that I thought about was really nothing. My assumption was that Chinese Canadians didn't participate in the Allied effort. And I talked to other people about it while I was, sort of thinking about this. And my story wasn't very different. Most people didn't realize that Chinese people had done very much during the war effort. If you compare that to the other side of my family, because I told you earlier that my husband is not Chinese and his family has been in Canada since the 1800s. He actually had lots of information about the people in his family who had served during the military. There was a man named Private William Harry Little who had served in the First World War and died in France. There was a nursing sister, Elizabeth Langman, who was part of the Second World War effort in Sicily and North Africa. And there was a Staff Sergeant Melville Parnell, who was in the special service called the Devil's Brigade. So when my son needed to take history in high school, we were able to do a whole history project about some of his relatives on his father's side of the family who had served during military. But we didn't know anything about Chinese military service up until then. So I was curious, and I decided I needed to do some more research about this. And when I was doing the research for Endgame, Force 136, I realized that this was a really, really important part of Chinese, the history of Chinese in Canada. During this time, the Canadian government wasn't allowing a lot of immigration of Chinese people to Canada. As a matter of fact, Chinese immigration to Canada was almost stopped completely. And during the Exclusion Act, we were the only actual group of people who were ever named saying that we couldn't immigrate to Canada. And the Chinese people in Canada weren't really citizens, considered citizens in Canada during this time. They weren't allowed to be professional people. They weren't really allowed to join the military during the Second World War because a lot of the units, there was racism, and some people would go and try to register themselves, and it was thought that they weren't needed. And so it was very frustrating time. It was a very frustrating time. And the Chinese people who lived in Canada at that time were kind of divided about whether they should help with the war effort or not. Because on the one hand, they lived in Canada and contributed to Canada. But on the other hand, the Canadian government didn't consider them citizens. So they weren't sure. If you're interested in World War history, there's like one really important book that I read because I didn't learn about these things in school. And it was called The Dragon and the Maple Leaf by a woman named Marjorie Wong. But even that book wasn't written until 1992, 1993 time. And this book was very, very interesting and gave me a lot of the information that I eventually used in my picture book. I also had the opportunity to go to the Chinese Canadian Military Museum in Vancouver. That was created in 1998. So these things were actually pretty recent. And they had some information about Force 136. So I went and did some research and learned more about veterans. What I did learn was that by the end of the World War II, there were over 600 Canadians who had Chinese origin who had served. And approximately 490 of them were in the Canadian Army. 115 were with the Air Force, and about 8 were with the RCN. Of the 490 Chinese Canadians who were in the Canadian Army, about 134 were what we called special duty officers, and they were recruited by the British Special Operations Executive for operations in Southeast Asia. And these are the Force 136 people that I eventually wrote my book about. When I did this research and found out that only there were 600 people of Chinese origin who participated, I asked myself, is this a significant number of people? Because in Canada, it said that there were 1 million people who were involved in the World War efforts. But according to the census information at that time, it was a significant number of people based on how many people of Chinese heritage were here and how many of them were eligible to be in the Army at the time. So the background for Force 136 was that in 1941, Japan entered the Second World War and occupied a lot of Southeast Asia. And even though Chinese people weren't really wanted in the Canadian military, the British Special Operation Executive thought that it would be kind of useful to have people who looked Asian to be trained as almost spies to be dropped into enemy territory so that they could work with the resistance movement. And the Chinese men who lived in Canada were ideal because we were part of the Allies, and many of them could still speak the language of the country of where they came from, the different villages that they came from. And it was a really important sort of part of the war effort to have resistance behind enemy lines. That photograph is of me, and I'm standing in front of the British Special Operations Executive Office, where they have that plaque now to commemorate all the people who supported the war effort at that time. So what did they want these men for? Well, they wanted them to learn commando warfare techniques, and they trained them to do stalking, silent killing, jungle survival, demolition, wireless operations, espionage, parachuting, silent swimming, all of the things that you would see in movies. There was one article that was written about these men, and they called them the James Bonds of Chinatown. So it was really a very, very dangerous mission, and not anything like the normal army operations at all. So the plan was to take these people and drop them in small teams behind the Japanese lines. And they were expected to survive in the jungle with no outside support. And their mission was to find and train local resistance fighters and work with the local guerrilla groups to sabotage things like railway stations and food supply lines, and to conduct espionage or spying. The Force 136 recruitment started with 13 men in Operation Oblivion, and they were trained in Canada at a place called Goose Bay. And by the end of January 1945, there were about 150 men had been sort of seconded or recruited. And the majority of them were sent to India, where I was born. And I thought that was kind of cool. And they had other, really neat kind of operation headings like Operation Galvanic and Operation Humor and Operation Snooper. Very cool code names. So in the end, most of the recruits were not fully deployed before Japan surrendered because the Americans dropped the atomic bombs and ended the war. We did have some Chinese people operate behind enemy lines in Borneo, Malay, and Singapore for many months. They did become very well-trained soldiers who were able to do all the things that they were expected to do. And since the war ended, they also participated in liberating prisoner of war camps and maintaining order and security after the surrender. All of the Force 136 members survived the war and returned home to Canada, but many of them sort of contracted tropical diseases while they were away. It was such a secret mission that some of these men who got sick because they had been in tropical countries, they weren't allowed to tell anyone where they had been. And so some of their doctors couldn't figure out what diseases they had. When the men came back from fighting, one of the things that they really tried to do was to get full citizenship rights for Chinese Canadians. They told the government, we really proved ourselves by going off to war and fighting for the Allies and for Canada. And so eventually in 1947, Chinese Canadians were finally allowed to vote in Canada. So I took all of this information and I decided to make a picture book out of it, which I would like to share with you now. And then after I finish reading the picture book, I understand that there were some questions that had already been sent in. But if you're listening now and you have questions about what I told you about the history of Chinese in Canada or about what I'm going to read in the picture book, please send them in and then we'll use them in the question and answer session that's going to come up afterwards. I usually work with an illustrator named Sai Kimura, but for this book, my publisher wanted a different look to this book because of the theme. And it was digitally illustrated by a very talented young man named Shan Wang. And he created all of these beautiful illustrations. So this game starts, the book starts in the imagination. The soldier took a deep breath as he prepared to enter the river. His heart leapt when he heard the enemy's cannon. The cannon was so close, the ground shook under his feet. Things felt bleak, but there was no turning back. That's the game. Taikung's cheerful declaration of victory snapped me back to reality. On my 10th birthday, my great-grandfather Taikung gave me a Chinese chess set. He said it was called Shangqi, or elephant chess, and he taught me how to play. I already knew how to play chess, but Taikung preferred Shangqi. I asked Sean to integrate things that would be in a typical Chinese household, so maybe some of you recognize sort of this calendar or this popular Chinese snack that is snuck in here in the background. In Shangqi, there were two armies, one red and the other black. The board had lines and points, and there was a river dividing the two sides. Taikung taught me the characters for each, the general, the advisors, the elephants, the horses, the chariots, the cannons, and the soldiers. He showed me where to place the pieces and how to move each one. He explained that some pieces had to stay in the palace and showed me which pieces could cross the river. We began each game by flipping a coin to see who would command the red army. I liked to play the red side because I got to move first, but Taikung never seemed to mind either way. Then we took turns moving our pieces. To win, you had to checkmate the opponent's general. I picked up Shangqi quite easily, and Taikung and I played many games every time Mum and I visited him at the retirement home. Taikung was a patient teacher, always reminding me to take the time to plan ahead before each move, sometimes pointing out after a game what I could have done. I never paid much attention. I was impatient and focused on winning without losing any of my favorite pieces. But I could never win. In the months we had been playing, I had never once put Taikung's general into checkmate. It was the same again today as Taikung called, "Checkmate!" I jumped out of my seat in frustration. "Why can't I ever win, Taikung?" I asked after losing the third game in a row. It wasn't the first time I was upset about losing, but this time it was just too much. "You have to plan ahead, Alex," Taikung replied. "As I have told you many times, slow down and plan your strategies. Focus on the big picture." "But Taikung, I'm not sure what the big picture is." "If you really want to learn, let's play again, and I will show you," Taikung said with a wave of his hand, instructing me to reset the board, as I did after every game. Maybe you have a favorite activity that you play with your great-grandparent or a grandparent. So now we're back into the imagination, Alex's imagination. The soldier felt he was being tailed. The enemy had been following his every move since he had crossed the river. He was surrounded and about to be captured again. And here Sean has depicted one of the soldiers in the Chinese chess game sort of come to life, being surrounded by the enemy. "Time to go!" Mom's voice startled me, just as I was beginning to understand what Taikung was explaining. I stood up, reluctant to leave. "Thank you, Taikung. I think I'm starting to see the big picture." "That's good, Alex, but wait a minute. I've got something for you," Taikung said, shifting in his wheelchair. I smiled, knowing he would hand me the usual crisp $5 bill for a little treat later. "My wallet!" exclaimed Taikung, pulling an empty hand from his pocket. "Where's my wallet?" His eyes darted from the dresser to the bed as he struggled to move his wheelchair around the room. "I have to find it." I had never seen Taikung so agitated. He was usually so calm. I could tell Mom had never seen him like this either. "It's okay. We'll help you look for it. We can always get you a new wallet if we don't find this one," Mom said, trying to soothe him. But Taikung was frantic. "No, I don't want a new wallet," he cried out. "I must find my wallet." Mom looked under the dresser. I crawled under the bed. No wallet. Then I picked up my backpack and at the end of the bed, and something fell off to the floor. Taikung's wallet. Taikung slumped forward in his wheelchair, overcome with relief. Tears slid down his cheeks. Mom and I were shocked. Neither of us had ever seen Taikung cry. I passed Taikung a tissue. He dried his eyes. Then in a soft voice he said, "Come here, Alex. I want to show you something." Taikung motioned for me to sit on the bed and held out his hand. I handed him his wallet. I waited as he ran his fingers over the worn leather. Finally, he opened it and pulled out some tattered, faded photographs. Taikung spread the photographs on the bed. He picked up a photo of a group of young men looking at the camera. Then he said, "I need to tell you something important. I want to tell you about Force 136. "What is this? Who are the people in this picture?" Mom asked. Force 136 was a secret group formed during World War II. We weren't allowed to tell anyone about it. "Why was it a secret, Taikung?" I asked. "Were you a spy?" "I guess yes, in a way we were spies. That's why we couldn't tell anyone." Taikung clutched the wallet in his hands as if he would never let it go. No wonder the wallet was so important to him. It held important memories. And these photographs, they were kind of based on real ones that the illustrator found when he was doing his research for doing the illustrations for the book. "That sounds dangerous. Why did you join Force 136, Taikung?" I asked. Taikung shook his head, and then he replied, "Alex, in those days, life was very difficult for Chinese people in Canada. We weren't allowed to vote. We couldn't become lawyers or doctors or teachers. When the war broke out, we wanted to serve in the military, but we were not wanted. We were rejected because we were Chinese." "That's terrible," I interjected. Taikung nodded and then continued. "Many of us had come to love Canada as our country and couldn't imagine any other home. We thought if we showed our loyalty by being willing to fight with the other men, even sacrifice our lives, things would change. That maybe we would be accepted and be treated fairly, and life would be better for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, like you, Alex." Taikung started to put the photographs back into his wallet, but I needed to know more. "If Chinese people weren't allowed in the army, how did you end up in Force 136, I asked. Taikung sighed. By around 1941, a lot of Southeast Asia was occupied by the enemy, and since we looked like the people from there and spoke the local language, we could be trained for special missions behind enemy lines. Some of us thought this was the chance that we had been waiting for, the chance to prove ourselves. So we signed up. "What did you do in Force 136, Taikung?" I asked. "Well, I was trained to survive in the jungle. Conditions were very tough. It was hotter and steamier than anywhere I had ever been. The sweat rolled down my face so I could barely see. We had to learn so much, how to operate the radios, how to stalk the enemy, how to swim. That was a tough one. We couldn't swim at all because we weren't allowed in the public swimming pools at home. I practiced and practiced, until I could swim without making a sound. Once we were ready, we were parachuted from a plane behind enemy lines into tropical jungles. There I followed the enemy and learned how to escape if I was being followed. I survived by eating insects and plants. I swam across rivers. My team parachuted into Malaya and blew up a railway bridge and as much of the tracks as we could. But then the Americans dropped the atomic bombs and the war was officially over. But there was still so much to do. Prisoners of war had to be liberated. Some units refused to surrender. People were still scared. It was chaotic, and we helped keep order. You were so brave, Taikong. I did what I had to do, Alex, replied Taikong. So now we're back to the chess game in the imagination. The soldier felt alone and helpless until he looked back and saw the outline of a chariot in the distance. Then he heard the roar of familiar cannons not far behind. He knew he could distract the enemy in front of him, perhaps sacrifice a cannon or maybe a horse. It was worth it to give the chariots and cannons a chance to do their work. You made a lot of sacrifices, Taikong. Was it worth it? Taikong's face lit up. Yes, it was. After we came back from the war, things began to change. Starting in 1947, Chinese Canadians could vote in British Columbia. And today you can be anything you want, Alex, even Prime Minister someday. Always remember, someone has to cross the river first. I saw the big picture at last. I understood that Taikong and the other men thought joining Force 136 was part of a strategy to build a better life. They were thinking many moves ahead like good Shang-Chi players. They were focused on the end game. Good Shang-Chi players understood how to use the pieces that could cross the river and how to use the pieces that couldn't. Good Shang-Chi players knew that victory often required sacrifices. No wonder Taikong always won. All this time, Taikong had been teaching me so much more than Shang-Chi, and I finally understood. I studied the board. I leaned back so that I could see the big picture. And then I moved my horse into danger. It wasn't what Taikong was expecting me to do. He looked at the board, then at me, and smiled. And we both knew that this game was going to end differently. So that's the end of the story. But as I told you before, Force 136 was a true story. And in the back of my book, I have included some historical notes to explain some of the discrimination that was going on at the time, what Force 136 did, and how what they did affected Chinese people in Canada up until now. Because right now, there's a new exhibit opening up at the Chinese Canadian Museum in Vancouver, where I'm going next week to do a presentation about my book, because they have a whole presentation now about Chinese veterans. Also in the back of the book, I included a section about a family where 3 members of the family were part of Force 136. And when I met one of the members of this family, they didn't even realize that their family member had been in Force 136. It was such a secret that they weren't allowed to share when they got back until many, many, many years later. And I also included a section about Shang-Chi, or Chinese chess. And I've been to many schools in Markham and in the Toronto Catholic District School Board where they have chess clubs. And there are some schools that are also starting to teach Chinese chess, or Shang-Chi. It's called elephant chess. And usually it looks like this with the little circles and Chinese characters. But in our book, we decided to use the pieces that look like the pieces that they are, so that it would be easier for the artist, Sean, to make them come to life in those pages between the sections of the book where Alex's imagination is about the chess game. So why did I write a picture book to share this story? Well, I used to be a teacher. I taught math and science in junior high school, grades 7, 8, and 9. And I used to write textbooks. So I could have written a textbook or some kind of nonfiction book about Force 136. But I thought that it would be better as a story because I always used to read my students storybooks, even in math and science class, to help them to be introduced to a topic or to learn about a topic in kind of a more fun way. And it worked out great for this book because in 2023, the CBC selected this book as one of 11 Canadian books to read for Remembrance Day. And in spring 2024, the Canadian Children's Book Centre picked Endgame as a starred best book for spring 2024. So Brant Louie, who's the head of London Drugs Foundation, which is a drugstore kind of like Shoppers Drug Mart, but only in the Western provinces, they thought that this book was such an important one to have in libraries and that children should read, that they donated it to all of the schools and libraries in the 4 Western provinces. And Mr. Brant Louie is one of the members of the Louie family, where 3 soldiers were part of Force 136. And this is another reason that I create picture books. I wanted to celebrate culture, and my culture is Chinese culture, and eliminate contributions of the Chinese Canadian men and women who were part of our early history in Canada. And when I had my own son in 2002, I had a hard time finding resources that could help him learn about his Chinese Canadian heritage. I had a book called 12 in a Race that I tried for 15 years to get published before it was published. And I read him that book to teach him about the zodiac. And it took that long to get it published, where he was this old when I started writing the book. And now he's a young man in his early 20s. So I hope that the books that I write, 12 in a Race for the Chinese Zodiac and Dragon's Dilemma, a follow-up to it, and books like Endgame, The Secret Force 136, can help more young people learn about the contributions of Chinese Canadians to Canadian culture. So I understand that there are a few questions that have been sent in. And if you have some questions that came up while I was doing my presentation, please send them in. And then they'll start to send them to me, and I'll answer the questions for this next part of the presentation.
Well, can you hear me now?
Okay, yes.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I thought like, oh, how come? So thank you so much, Catherine. That was so inspiring. And I think it was a very good decision for you to decide, like, to make it a picture book, because the topic would be very heavy for young folks to really understand if it's just written like without those beautiful pictures and the drawing. Whoever was the illustrator was really great. And the thing that I'd like to say about the book was that it's amazing that you're able to actually put in all together like the story in such a way that it discussed contributions, services, at the same time race, discrimination, and stories to tell, and also intergenerational activity between the boy and the grandfather, and really there were some touching moments there as well in terms of the losing that wallet, and why it was so important, because that was like a secret that the grandfather was keeping. And so, you know what, let's not keep this secret anymore.
Right.
This time around we have to spread the word out. I think it's very important that our students and you don't have to be Chinese, because this is part of Canadian history, right? And I think it's very, very important to stress that out. And I have 2 Chinese words that I heard today, like Shangxi and Tai Kum.
Taiko.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I wonder if we can put in our questions there, Carmela. Okay, so this is one of the questions. Are there lessons or suggested supplementary learning materials for students to further engage in?
And the answer is yes. My publisher is Plumleaf Press. And so if you go to the Plumleaf Press website, there are learning resources that have been posted, some of them specifically for Asian Heritage Month, that use my books, 12 in a Race, Dragon's Dilemma, and Endgame. But also Plumleaf Press has published a couple of other books called I Am Not a Ghost, about the Chinese building of the railway in Canada, and A Song for the Paper Children, which was about the head tax, a poem that was presented at Parliament in 2023 on the 100th anniversary of the Exclusion Act. So if you go to the resources, there are some lesson plans about using those. And you should also, under the Endgame little booklet tab there on plumleafpress.com, there is a Shang-Chi paper set that you can print out and make so that you can try to learn how to play Shang-Chi as well.
That's incredible. That's so good. I love to play. I love playing actually chess, and I think I see that in a lot of Asian communities, the love for chess. So thanks for that. The other question is, when did you realize you wanted to be a writer and an author?
It was a really long and slow kind of process because I never really thought of myself as a writer or an author. And it's only very recently that I kind of realized, I guess I am a writer. I wanted to be a teacher. And as I said, I became a junior high school math and science teacher. And while I was a teacher, I did a certain kind of writing. I wrote textbooks. And so that sort of seemed natural. If you're a math teacher, you might help to write a math textbook, and I did that. And then I taught science, so I helped to write science textbooks. And some of the textbooks are still in use. So if you go check some of them, you might have my name on some of the textbooks that you have to use in class. But I've always really loved picture books. And so when I was a teacher, I would read picture books to my students to introduce topics, about when we were studying astronomy, when we were studying mathematical concepts. There's some really great ones to teach about,
Actually, picture books really are hard to develop because, like you are bringing the complex concept, into a much simpler way so that students can understand them. So I also love picture books.
Yes.
So and especially, it's so important that we're doing this because literacy skills is very important in learning and development. So I think I would like to really kudos to you for doing that. And I'm so proud to also learn that you are our students aboard, student from Our Lady of Fatima. Did you say Our Lady of Fatima, right?
Yes,
So what a journey. So what a journey. And to all students who are listening, this is a very good role model. And anybody can be a writer. Is that right, Catherine? Anybody can be an author and anybody can tell your own stories. And I think there's really nothing that prevents you from doing that. Even, do you have any actually like tips, for example, like for those who are starting out, for those students who want to really learn?
Well, I think that sometimes we think, oh, well, there are so many books that have already been written that we're not exactly sure what we can write about that would be new. But I think that with this example, what I'm trying to show is that there are so many stories that still need to be told.
Yep.
And so you can look into your own family history, maybe your own immigration story, or maybe your own
passion,
grandparents and great-grandparents and passion, and tell a story that only you could tell. And so I think that once you start to write, you're already a writer. Now, getting a book published is a different thing, but there are other ways to get books published now. As I said, my first book, 12 in a Race, took 15 years before I could find a publisher who wanted to publish that book. But now it's been great. But now with the technology that we have, it's possible to sort of, write a book and publish a book sort of yourself And if it's a story that's just for you, it's still a very important story that needs to be can be told.
That's right. And I just have one curious question. How did your son actually receive the book? How did he take it?
I think he's pretty proud about it because he was at the age where he was sort of in his late teens when it finally got published.
Oh.
He was too old for he was beyond the age of the picture book. Although I believe that a good picture book is for all ages.
Yep.
I've had many people tell me that they bought my picture books because they never had picture books like that when they were young, and so they wanted to have a Zodiac picture book and that sort of thing. But sometimes he'll come with me when I do readings at the library, or I've done them at the art gallery and at the ROM. And I can kind of tell that maybe he's just a little bit proud that he was the inspiration for that first picture book that sort of gave me this whole new career path after I stopped teaching and stopped doing my lecturing at York University.
That's great. And your picture book is available anywhere, Catherine? Where can we find that? And like, I would love to grab a copy and then put it in our library. So can you tell us about it?
So Plumleaf Press books are available online and in stores. And I know that some people order them from a different story or another bookstore. Those independent bookstores can order our books, and many of them will carry them in store as well. They're also available directly from the publisher at plumleafpress.com and on Amazon and Indigo. And when I do presentations in person, sometimes I bring books as well. So we'd love it if people asked the people who sell books to schools, like Tin Lids and all of those other places, just to carry these books, because Plumleaf Press is an independently owned publishing house in Oakville, Ontario, run by a Chinese Canadian woman. It's a very small publishing house, so we're not as well known as other publishing houses yet.
We'll spread a word for sure, Catherine. So this is the other question. What was the reason behind telling this story during a chess game?
Right. Well, I needed a reason for Alex. Alex is my son's name, so I kind of snuck his name into the book as the young man, to be visiting his great-grandfather, Taikung. And I thought back that many times we may not do as much with our grandparents and our great-grandparents as we like, but many of us have memories of maybe playing games with them,
yes,
or doing things like that. And so originally my first draft of the story was about Alex and Taikung playing chess, Western chess, because I'm actually more trained. I'm better at Western chess than Chinese chess. And I used to teach the chess club at my school when I was a teacher, and I did all those things. But then when I got to the second draft of the book, I remembered that my father had taught me how to play Shang-Chi as a child. And I thought, wouldn't it be nicer if Taikung and Alex played Shang-Chi instead of Western chess? Because Taikung would have been more familiar with Shang-Chi than Western chess. And I wanted Taikung to be teaching Alex the game. And the imagery of that chess set also worked much better. The metaphor that I wanted to use of the chess game and the different pieces, the ones that can leave the palace or can't leave the palace. Certain pieces also can't cross the river, so they're limited in what they can do, but they can only do what they can on one side of the river. And the river became a metaphor in itself, because at the end, Taikung says to Alex, remember, someone has to cross the river first.
And I like that. Actually, I really love that line. The sacrifices that they have to make so that we all can enjoy whatever we are doing right now. So that's really very important to note. And I just realized also now I learned a lot that their contribution was actually very significant in terms of the danger of that of the mission, and it's so unfortunate that we haven't really talked a lot about that. And this is good. This is a good thing that we are doing now. It's opening up. And it's not too long ago, 1947, when you talked about that's the only time that the Chinese citizens were able to vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that, you know, there are stereotypes about why so many people of Chinese heritage ran laundries or restaurants or did those kinds of jobs in those times. And one explanation is that we weren't allowed to go to university and become professional people. And so they had to find work that they were allowed to do. And so if Chinese people weren't even allowed to vote until 1947, that's just a couple of generations ago.
Exactly. Not too long ago. Wow. And I just want, sorry, I just want to point out there with this, can you please explain a little bit about the
web link?
Yeah, the web link, yes.
Okay, so a few months ago, I met a group called Honoring Bravery at a conference. And it turns out that they're a website that you can go to, and they're dedicated to bringing to students and teachers resources that will help them learn about the brave men and women who helped Canada form itself as a country during wartime, and their diverse contributions as well. So they asked me to write a blog post. And so some of the things that I talked to you today about my learning to become, to write for Endgame are here in this blog post. And if you also go to that website, they have traveling exhibits that you can request for free to come to your classroom, and also other resources and other blog posts that might be of interest.
That's a very good information for all teachers who are listening. And today, that we do have a lot of resources, and this is one of them. There's another question, and I wonder if Carmela, you can put up Sarah on screen. Sarah, can you read your question? Or there you go.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hello.
I have a question. As for the process of making your book, what was your favorite part, and was there any challenges you faced?
I think my favorite part was actually realizing that it was going to become a book. So there are many processes to becoming a book, to getting a book published. If I'm an author, so I don't do illustrations. And so the first thing you have to do is make a manuscript and do another draft of your manuscript and another draft of your manuscript. And when a publisher says that they would like to work with you and they like your manuscript, they're the ones who choose the illustrator. So I like working with an illustrator sometimes to make this book come to life, because for a picture book, the illustrations are just as important as the story. And picture book illustrations make the story for picture books. And for this storybook, Sean, who did all of his illustrations digitally, at first I was a little bit concerned because I had always worked with somebody who did traditional methods for illustration, you know, watercolors or acrylics or gouache paintings. And I found that a lot of digital illustrations can look kind of clunky and fake. But Sean's method for digital illustration just kind of blew me away. And he brought my story to life that way. The other thing that I was really interested in was I wanted to make sure that I got all of the Shang-Chi references right in my book. And so I had to reach out to the Toronto Shang-Chi Association, and I asked them to read my manuscript. They also looked at all of the illustrations that Sean did to make sure that they worked with the Shang-Chi, that it was possible for these positions to be held in the Shang-Chi game, and that the way that I was using Shang-Chi as a metaphor was right. And so now I work with the Toronto Shang-Chi Association, also trying to promote Shang-Chi for young people, because many people across the world play Shang-Chi, and Canada actually has a pretty good international standing of Shang-Chi players.
Yes, and thank you for that question, Sarah. And the Shang-Chi is very, very similar to the Chinese. It's I mean to the Western, as you were talking about, right? And then you also saw that TCDSB has actually a group of chess players, right? And I know that they sometimes gather at our board office for a day of chess. So that is very good. Any other questions? I would ask Carmela, if there is none, would Is there any question, Carmela, from your part? You are on mute, Carmela.
There have not been any other questions.
Okay,
We
all
are
right.
here. Yep.
Thank you so much. So I just would like to just thank our Asian author, Catherine Little, for sharing us her journey about writing this book. And there's a lot of things that we have learned for today, like the contributions and the service of our Asian Canadians community. And then also that it really chimes in with our theme this month, which is Asian Canadian legacy. We contribute, we serve. And I just would like to emphasize that this information that was before secret is no longer supposed to be secret. It has to be shared, and we should be proud of all the contributions that all Canadians make Canada a very good country. So, any last words, Catherine?
Well, I just want to thank you, Jody and Carmela, for inviting me and for making this possible. And if there are people watching and they'd like to reach out, I'm on Instagram at Books Beyond Bedtime. And you can always message me or write me via my publisher at Plumleaf Press.
That's great. And for tomorrow, if you still want to know more about Asian Canadians' contributions, tomorrow we're going to have another webinar here at the same time, 9:45 to 10:45. And this time around, we'll be talking about Asian musicians and their contributions as well. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Carmela. And to our student interns, Sarah and Janet, thank you very much. And to all teachers and students, thank you and have a good one. Enjoy your day and happy Asian Canadian Heritage Month.